welcome to another episode of Global Gurus, Thought Leadership in 15 Minutes. My name is Laura Gassner Otting, and I am thrilled to be joined by my co-host, Rhett. And today we have one of my favorite humans. He is the author of Employalty. He is a Hall of Fame speaker. He is on the Global Gurus Management Professionals list. His name is Joe Mull. Welcome, Joe.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be here with you both today.
So as you know, we start every episode. We ask our guests just 3 questions. 3 questions, 15 minutes. One guru, one IP, one framework, one solution. So we start with, what is the biggest problem you see right now? What is the original framework or IP you are taking to solve this problem? And what kinds of measurable results are you seeing in its application? So I'll start off and ask you, what's the biggest problem you see right now, Joe Mull?
The biggest problem that I see right now is that most leaders and business owners don't understand or engineer the conditions that lead to employee commitment. And I describe employee commitment as the intersection of both retention and engagement. So what leads people to join an employer, stay long-term, and give it all you've got? And what we have continued to get wrong about this is that we want it to be transactional. We want to operate with the expectation that in exchange for employment and a paycheck, that people will come to work and give it all they've got. But that is magical thinking, because people aren't robots, because we have moods and emotions and needs and all sorts of forces upon us at work. And so employee commitment is not transactional. It is something that has to be activated and it has to be nurtured. And the biggest influence on that is an employee's direct supervisor.
You are speaking my language. I'm working on a new book project called Lost in Transaction. And I want to follow that thread a little bit, Joe. What is the methodology that you have here that a leader can deploy or put in practice here? Because I think we are in this kind of moment where it's time to double down on cultures, time to double down on our people. So what is how do we do this with your framework?
Yeah. So I ended up writing Employalty because I got really frustrated by the conversation that was happening around the Great Resignation a few years ago, which was being pointed to as sparked by COVID. It was being described as being caused by a lot of opportunity that had been created in the labor force. And those were influencing factors. But the movement that had been taking place in the labor market had actually been a slow burn that had started after the Great Recession coming out of 08 and of 09. And what we see in the labor force nowadays is that the biggest driver of people deciding to change jobs is quality of life. To what degree does my job create suffering for me outside of work, or does it positively impact what matters most to me? And I had done a podcast interview a couple of years ago where I've been speaking and writing about employee commitment for years. And the host and I had this beautiful 30-minute conversation about all the things that leaders need to get right in order to activate commitment. And at the very end of the podcast, the host said, "Well, let's put a nice bow on this for everybody, Joe. Give it to me in one sentence. Where does commitment come from at work?" And I went, and I couldn't give it to him in one sentence. And I thought, boy, if I can't compartmentalize this into a simple answer or framework that leaders can use, then what hope do leaders or business owners anywhere have of getting the right things right? And so I became convinced that the world needed a one-sentence answer to that question. So we analyzed more than 200 studies and articles on why people quit a job, why they take a new job, why they stay long-term with an employer. And we married that together with a boatload of social science research around effort, the psychology of effort, and what is often referred to as employee engagement in the workplace. And we also layered that in with a lot of data about what had been happening in the labor market. And what came out of that were 3 pieces of the employee experience that if you get them right, you have a much greater chance of finding and keeping devoted employees. And so if I could go back to that podcast interview again, and that host asked me that question, I would say in one sentence, commitment appears when employees are in their ideal job, doing meaningful work for a great boss. And so that's my answer to your second question about the IP. It's ideal job is about how the job fits into my life. Does my pay work? Does the workload match? Do I have some flexibility? Meaningful work is about what I'm doing and who I get to do it with. So am I getting to use my talents? Do I have a sense of belonging? And am I getting a sense of purpose out of the work? And then that third factor, that great boss factor, is all about the quality of the relationship I have with the person who oversees my work and his or her ability to coach me and advocate for me and create an environment that I want to be a part of.
It's such a great definition of great boss, because I think a lot of people think, oh, I'm a great boss because I go to the conferences, because I do the training, because I get good results. But it's so fascinating to me. We've run our own study since 2019, and we've seen the same results. Everyone's like, oh, clearly the pandemic changed everything. I'm like, no, the pandemic just exposed everything that had already been going on. But what we found, 10,000 results from all over the world, every possible demographic and industry, was that people are just as likely to leave quote unquote great bosses if they don't have a relationship with them as they are to leave a quote unquote bad boss. And so can you talk a little bit about how, I know that you help teach bosses how to be great bosses. How are you applying this understanding, this framework, to actually help them create measurable results? How did they become those great bosses?
Yeah. So this is both a knowledge gap and a skills gap. So leaders have to have an understanding of what the conditions are that we have to create in order for people to thrive at work. And so the question really of where does employee commitment come from, it's too big of a question to try to answer. But when you look at this framework that we've written, you can actually get more granular. It's much easier to answer the question of how do I engineer belonging? Or how do I engineer more flexibility for employees? Or how do I engineer a sense of purpose in the work that they're doing? And so we created a leadership masterclass and a leadership development program called Boss Hero School, where in the first part of that experience, it's all about teaching those conditions and helping leaders understand how to assess for those conditions at both an organizational level and at an individual level, and to think about my style as a leader. There are going to be certain parts of that employee experience that I naturally create because of how I'm wired or what my personality is or what I was taught to do by other leaders I've worked with. But you're also going to be able to look at that framework and say, I haven't really thought about that. So maybe that's a piece of the employee experience I need to be more intentional about. And then the other side of that is the skills gap. And so the first part of our program teaches the conditions that lead to employee commitment. The second part teaches the conversations. And so we have to teach leaders in the workplace much deeper level of coaching skills. We all know coaching is kind of the silver bullet for employee engagement. And so giving leaders the chance to learn how to do that, to practice how to do that in an environment where it's safe to not be good at it at first. And then we layer on top of that additional skills training in feedback, additional skills training in what we call mentor mindset to kind of reorient what the role is that I should be playing as a leader. And one of the things that is sort of the preeminent message in the Employalty book and in my keynotes and workshops is that even the title, Employalty, it sounds like a mashup of employee loyalty. And of course, that's what we're writing and speaking about, but that's not where our title came from. It's a portmanteau of the words employer loyalty and humanity, that if you create a more humane employee experience, that's where commitment comes from at work. If you really want to know the secret to what leads people to care and try and give it all they've got, my boss has to want me to live a joyous, prosperous life. That has to be the starting point. And if I care about the people who work for me living a joyous, prosperous life, I can engineer an employee experience backwards from there that allows us to do great work and have that kind of experience outside of work. You're not going to have a commitment gap if you're leading in that way.
Well, I don't know that you have to do a lot. If people know that you care and they know that you want them to have a great life, the trust level is through the roof, right? That's what I wanted to bring up. I feel like when I was talking to a CEO the other day, and he said, I feel like there's a trust gap that I have with my team. And we're doing some coaching around that, but where does trust play into this, into what you're talking about here?
Yeah,
Because I think right now people, they want to trust who they're working for, but I think that's harder and harder these days.
Yeah. If you actually got to see our our scorecard, our Employalty scorecard, trust is named as one of the dimensions of the great boss factor. And trust is a two-way street, right? Do I grant trust to the people in my charge? Once people are properly trained in a role in the workplace, do I grant them ownership? Do I grant them freedom to execute their work product in the way that they best see fit? Or am I micromanaging the hell out of them? The other side of that street is, do I earn their trust? Do I earn their trust by being at a minimum present? Do I have a deeper understanding of what's hard about their jobs? Do I treat them as having knowledge about their jobs? And do I operate with the understanding that in a lot of ways, they know more about this than I do because of the nature of the chair that they sit in. And so that two-way street has to be present. And to your point, Rhett, like, we don't have to do grandiose things in order to be good at that. One of my favorite things to talk to leaders about is, how many times do you hear yourself say, I trust you? How many times have you pulled somebody aside when they've said, hey, can I ask you a question? And then they ask you a question and you say, well, what options do you see, right? You take a coaching approach because you want them to bring their insight and their creativity to the problem. We as leaders can get so caught up in fixing and having answers and just jumping right to guidance that we miss the opportunity to let people feel trusted and capable by taking a moment to say, hey, that's a great question. Let's talk about this. What do you think? And then those are the small kind of micro interactions that don't just breed trust, but ultimately commitment.
It's incredibly disempowering to have your boss solve the problem all the time. Because, you know, you don't get to learn, you don't get the opportunity, you don't get to stretch, you don't get to be rewarded and praised for doing the thing that was uncomfortable. But you know, it's interesting. I have an executive assistant who has worked for me for the last year and a half, and she her name is Jeannie, and she's in my phone as I dream of Jeannie, because she is my dream. She's amazing. She's like the best assistant I've ever had. But it took probably a good 6 to 9 months for her to trust that I trusted her. I think she had so much PTSD from a former job where she just, like, if she had something that she was having trouble with, she was so afraid to try and to show. And so I would just say, look, commander's intent, right? Like, I trust you. Like, you know that I need to be at this place at this time, and you know what else is going on in my life. And like, I just trust that you're going to get me there. And she was almost like bothering me with all of the micro details. And at some point I wanted to be like, listen, if you need me, I don't need you. So like, figure it out. But I couldn't say that because that would trigger the PTSD. But it took me a long time to stay in that, like, I got to just teach her that I trust her. I got to teach her that I trust her. Is there a faster, better way to show our people that we trust them than just time? Because it took a long time. It's amazing now, but it took a long time.
I mean, maybe, but I don't know that I know what it is yet. I wrote at the end of the Employalty book that I was very intentional across that book of not using the word culture very often, because it becomes a sort of overused term and it means different things to different people. My definition of the word culture, I mean, one of my favorites is that culture is the way that we do things around here. But when we think about what culture is and where it comes from, culture is a collection of experiences, and they're experiences that we have over and over and over again. And so if you want a culture where people feel trusted and they execute work with a greater deal of ownership, they need to have a collection of experiences that lead them to feel that way. And if you've got someone coming into the organization who was micromanaged, then you may have to spend some time paying for the sins of a prior bad boss in order to build them up to the level of independence or comfort or ownership that you want, right? So you've been digging out of a hole with this person. And so, I mean, if I'm working with an organization, I'm probably having some conversations about training and about feedback. I'm also probably having some conversations about what are your core values as an organization and how are you articulating those and making them known to your people on your teams. Because if one of our core values is trust or respect or ownership, then we're sort of proactively pouring that into people and letting them know that it's okay to operate in an independent way. But beyond that, Laura, I think you're putting in the time that it takes.
Yeah, I'm struck by this, a lot of intentional change theory in here, where, you know, you're sort of keeping people in that positive emotional attractor state long enough for them to be excited and to dream and to grow. But bosses often it takes a long time to get people to that point, and bosses are dealing with quarterly returns and the board is asking what's going on. So you have to have a little bit more comfort with the short-term risk in order to have the long-term growth, while you're also trying to show people that you trust them, while also knowing that they're going to mess up sometimes. And and I guess this is probably our last question, is how do you get bosses in your Boss Hero School comfortable with the, you might not be able to give the board the best result. You might have some mistakes. How do you figure out what's okay to what are the lost leaders, I guess, in order to get the better team long-term?
Yeah. We talk about failure as a teacher, right? And how it's necessary sometimes to let people fail because they're going to remember the lessons from it and apply them much more quickly than if you jump in and prevent that failure in the first place. And so we talk about failure in terms of degrees of harm, right? If you allow this person to fail, to what degree is it going to be harmful to your organization or to your customer or to your culture? If that harm is minimal, then that failure may be a good teacher. I just told this story in our last Boss Hero School cohort that the other day, my 9-year-old son took out and he's a little guy, he took out a brand new jug of milk and he unscrewed the cap and he starts to pour it. And I'm standing there in the kitchen and I had this moment where I was about to jump in and grab it and say, Henry, hold on, buddy, let me help you with that. Because there was at least a 50% chance that I was going to have a big mess on my hands. But I had that moment where I was like, just wait, because the only bad thing that comes out of this is spilled milk. And let's see. And he was fine and he did it. But it is hard in that moment to catch yourself and stop yourself, especially in workplaces where we're going 100 miles an hour and we need to move things along and get things done.
Well, Joe, I could talk to you for hours. I'm sure you have many stories and we like stories, but we have to wrap it up. And look, this is the Global Gurus podcast. We ask 3 questions. We try to get one methodology from our gurus, and we talk about real results here on the show. LGO, thank you so much for co-hosting with me today. Joe, thank you for being on the show. The book is, let's say it all together, Employalty. Right? Employalty. I love it. Go get yourself a copy if you want to be a hero boss. And Joe, thank you. Laura, thank you. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you both.